Welcome to this week's Ukraine War question and answer session with the inimitable Professor Michael Clarke. It is the 19th of November. We thank you yet again for submitting all of your questions. Michael, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Yeah,
Good to see you in person.
Yes,
we haven't seen each other for a while, have we, actually?
No, we haven't.
You were in that screen before, yeah. But schedules have aligned, so now we are in the same room, which is great. Again, thank you for all your questions. You can submit them as we're going along. We're going to start this week's Q&A slightly differently with a focus on the UK, because there's a Russian spy ship just outside UK territorial waters, or perhaps it had already come into UK territorial waters at one point.
Outside, I think.
Still outside.
Off northwest Scotland, it was the last position.
Called the Yantar, which the US Armed Force, UK Armed Forces are monitoring closely. The Defence Secretary, John Healey, has spoken about it in the last hour or so with a threat to Putin, interestingly. And our own Deborah Haynes has got a story up about the UK's defence posture at the moment, after there has been a report from the Defence Select Committee saying that we're just not in a position to defend ourselves, basically, at the moment, and much more needs to be done.
Yeah, I mean, the Defence Select Committee is saying that not enough is happening quickly enough. I mean, we know the Defence Review that came out in March this year laid out a 10-year programme, and it was a very big 10-year programme. It was completely different to every other Defence Review I've known since the 1990s, conceptually different. Mm-hmm. And the question is, the MOD, I think by common consent, is not moving quickly enough to implement it.
Yeah.
All these things need to be done relatively quickly. Doesn't mean to say they won't get done, but there's this sort of lag between now and about 2027 before things start visibly to change as new money comes into defence and they're able to use it on the things that they want.
Okay, well, let's get on to the questions then. First one coming from Charles. Thank you for this, Charles. John Healey says the UK has military options ready, if needed, to respond to that Russian spy ship, the Yantar. What could those options be?
Well, he wouldn't say, quite rightly, and he said, we're not going to help Putin or do his job for him. But he said, we do have, and he didn't just say options, because some options would be political, to have the ambassador in and give him a dressing down, to increase sanctions on something, all sorts of things you might do. But he did use the word military options. Now, you assume that military options would be some sort of plan to seize the ship or bring it into a British port and investigate it, something like that. That would be a big thing to do, because the ship is so far in international waters. It stays in international waters, but it hovers in areas of the close proximity to British territorial waters, which matter to us. So it hovers over a lot of the cables, the internet cables. It hovers over pipelines, and it does it all the time. Everywhere it goes, it hovers over cables and strategic things.
And is that a threat to cut them, or are they gaining information from their cables? Is that advanced?
Either or both. Wow. I mean, the Yantar has submersibles within it, so it can launch mini submarines. And I checked this morning, actually, I didn't know off the top of my head what the depth tolerance was for these submersibles. And he said that they have got an ability to go down about 6,000 metres, 20,000 feet. Now, that's well within anything on the continental shelf. And it's well within quite a lot of the Atlantic. Only the deepest parts of the Atlantic are really deeper than that, although some of them certainly are. But it can, anywhere around British coastline, they can sit on the seabed. So yes, they could cut cables, they could tap into cables, and they could cut pipelines. One thing about the people don't always appreciate the difference between cables and pipelines. If cables are cut, they can often be you can get around them. You just use other cables. There are so many cables, internet cables, that you just reroute everything. So it's just an inconvenience, because cables are damaged all the time for good and bad reasons. Pipelines are different. If a pipeline is severed, if it's blown up or it's somehow damaged, then somebody's got to get down there and fix it. It's not as if we've got lots of redundancy. You can't just divert oil into other pipelines, or indeed electricity through other pipelines. So pipelines are much more, in a sense, hard to replace. Internet cables are, as it were, made redundant lots of the time, because it's easy to lay more cables, and there are lots of other cables carrying the same traffic.
And for the avoidance of doubt, which pipelines do we have down there? And you say that if the Brits were to seize that ship, that would be an escalation. I mean, if they damaged our pipelines, our critical infrastructure. That would be an
we have
escalation.
big electrical pipelines from the continent. We have 2 or 3 big ones from Norway. There's another one, I think, from Belgium. There's another one opening up now with Ireland, and we're opening up one with Iceland. And so we've got some really critical pipelines, and then we've got pipelines around the Channel that go to France. So those are all part of the electricity grid because we share our electricity with I think it's called something like the Northwest European grid. So we can sort of buy and sell electricity with each other to cope with peaks and troughs of demand. So there's some important pipelines there. Then there's oil pipelines, of course, from the North Sea oil fields, because that oil has to be brought on shore. Those are pretty important. And again, we all know where they are. And this ship hangs around key points, and everywhere it goes pretty well. It's been, in the last, it's been around for 10 years, this ship.
Right.
I think it was launched in about 2014, 2015. Even when it went to Brazil, it was hanging around above Brazilian pipelines. That's all it does, actually.
Right.
Because it is a spy ship. And it's part of it's called Googie, which is and
Sounds scientific, but it's obviously
it's meant to be scientific, and so it has a reason to hang around and do things. But actually, we all know it's a spy ship.
so interesting. Sorry, before we move on to like what Vladimir Putin could well do in response to what he's heard from the defense secretary, who mans? What kind of personnel are on this ship? Are they military personnel? Are they security services?
They are, because the ship is part of the Northern Fleet. So it's the only survey ship like this in the Northern Fleet. The Russians have got another one in the Pacific Fleet, and they're apparently building a third one. So they've only got 2 operational, but they're very powerful ships. And before tensions rose to the degree that they've now reached, it was just a nuisance. I mean, everybody knew what it was in the defence business. They tracked where it went. They made sure the Russians knew that we would respond, as we always do. We send a ship to shadow it. When it was off the British coast a few years ago, they brought an astute submarine to the surface right next to it that the Yantar clearly didn't know about. And they said, look, we've been tracking you. If this was a conflict, you'd have been sunk a long time ago. So we play these sort of games with them. It's a bit like air incidents where you fly next to an intruder to show them that we could have shot you down if we'd chosen to. So that goes on. But things now are, because tension is pretty high, what the Yantar is doing now seems more threatening than, say, 4 or 5 years ago.
And I don't know if you guys have actually seen what it looks like. I mean, at first glance, you might think it's a ferry, but obviously it's not a ferry. It's got a blue sort of hull, did you describe, and then a white
civilian-looking ship.
Civilian-looking ship, right? And that's deliberate by design, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it doesn't. I don't think it's got a helicopter deck on it.
Not from what I can see from this. I mean, I'm having a look at the pictures here.
All of its electronic stuff is inside. There's a dome there, which a lot of ships have domes.
Well, this picture seems to suggest helipad, and then it's got
it might. Okay.
Aft rear. It's got areas
it might have
to launch as well.
I hadn't thought that, but maybe it has.
Large communications.
But certainly it's got the ability to launch submersibles.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
it means it's got an area below the waterline. Just open, James Bond style, opens up,
and it would be like that.
Submarine goes down. Yeah.
Some of this tech, Michael, in the mind, it's the realms of sort of fiction, but actually, no. This is the truth of it.
It's been around for 10 years.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So let's move on to a question from Alfie. Will Putin take any notice of what Healy said? Just before we answer that as well, it's become quite clear, I think, that in sort of Russian propaganda, the UK is really the bogeyman at times, isn't it? We're responsible for all sorts of actions within Russia. We are like public enemy number one for some of those Russian propagandists.
Among the Europeans, yeah. Because a lot of the Russian propagandists, they regard Britain as the most erstwhile of the opponents of the invasion of Ukraine, the one that has probably done more to help organise Europe towards helping Ukraine, even though materially we're now outstripped by what some of the other allies do because they've got more to give. The Germans
are really up there, yeah.
In financial terms, the Baltic states have given more in... the Scandinavian states have given more in military terms. I mean, we've given what we can, more or less, but I mean, our own stocks are so low that we've probably reached a level that we can't do very more until we restock ourselves. But the Russians regard us as the ringleader of the resistance movement among the Europeans to what they're trying to achieve in Ukraine. So yes, there is a sort of unique animus towards Britain, and that goes back. I mean, to
I was going to say it's historical.
the War of Intervention. I mean, Britain who led the War of Intervention against the Bolsheviks back in between 1917 and 1921, and even before that. I mean, Putin. When he's given speeches, he said that Britain from the 18th century onwards was pursuing containment. I mean, the British
Crimean
always
War,
tried to push the Russians back, he says.
You're right.
I mean, history is a bit more ambiguous than that, but that's his view of it, and there it is. So will he take any notice? Well, the fact is the Russians always log very, very carefully what is said and what is done. I mean, they don't take any of this casually. They're very assiduous in working out what they think is going on in foreign capitals, particularly European capitals. So yes, anything that John Healey says and anything that the Prime Minister may have backed up at question time, I haven't heard question time today, PMQs today, but I mean anything he might have said at PMQs, which I won't pick up until later on.
It wasn't a direct question from Kemi Badenoch, and apologies viewers if I missed any questions.
Sorry?
It wasn't a direct question from the opposition,
okay.
no.
Okay.
It may have come up in later questions.
Yeah.
And just on
But if he does make a comment, they will log it all very carefully. That's the point.
specifically what John Healey said, my message to Russia and to President Putin is this: we see you, we know what you're doing, and if the Yantar travels south this week, we are ready.
Well, that sounds quite...
I mean, it's kind of bullshit. It's
partly threatening. We are ready. I don't know what we're going to be ready with, but clearly there are contingency plans. And it's not only us. I mean, other NATO allies are also watching the Yantar. But I mean, because we're the North Atlantic country, we're the island off the northwest coast of Europe, it kind of falls under our remit a bit more than it does to some of our partners. But believe me, our partners, particularly in the north, our Scandinavian and Baltic partners, are very aware of all of this. So yes, the Russians they will take notice. Will it change their behaviour? No, but immediately. But it stocks up their sense of where we are in the willingness to confront them.
Yeah, it reinforces for them that we are an adversary.
Or they may decide, well, this is only more words, they won't actually do it, let's push them a bit further and see. Because, I mean, the Russians never recognise a red line until they feel it, until the red line is somehow enforced.
Right.
Because if you just say it, they will actually they'll see how far you really mean it, and that's always the issue. That they always set the escalation agenda. That's what they've been doing now since 2014. Certainly, they escalate, they set the agenda, then they see what you do. So they're not casual about it. They look very carefully at what we do. But so far, what they've seen is that we react always in a way that as it were is just a bit under the level of their action. We never go over their action. We always go slightly under what they have done.
And that's a doctrine that they have come to over decades, right?
Yeah.
Because they suspect that NATO will not want to risk war, so will always go slightly undercook it.
Yeah, that's their expectation, and at some point that will turn out to be wrong if they keep doing it. I mean, that's the road that we're on. Is that at some point NATO will say, okay, now we've got to go over. We've got to actually stop this. We've told them often enough, and we're going to dig our toes in. But the issue, as we've talked about before, is that as and when NATO does dig its toes in, it will seem to be digging its toes in over a relatively minor issue. Are we really going to risk a military confrontation over something in the Baltics or over the Yantar? Or over air incursions into some NATO states? Are we really going to risk, the exchange of fire over something relatively minor? And the answer is, well, because these are just, salami tactics, slice away at the European commitment. There comes a point at which one slice you have to dig your toes.
Yeah. Is it ever modelled that you do take a position over something that seems relatively minor, just to say, look, this is it. We're not going any further at this point.
And always, most. Again, I don't like talking about war all the time in this respect, as if it's absolutely inevitable. But when you look back at previous wars and you look back at military crises, shall we say, crises that really are military confrontation, they normally start with something that seems quite trivial, that one side seems to be unreasonable because it's objecting to something, that it's digging its toes in. And that's always the tactic of the escalator, as it were. Whoever's pushing the escalation is always pushing minor issues, but so many of them that eventually somebody says, well, we stop there.
I suppose our problem as well with the NATO alliance is all those member states have to agree.
That remember, the Second World War started on the 1st of September 1939, with the invasion of Poland. Britain went to war on the 3rd of September, the Sunday, after something that had happened on the Friday. What was it that provoked the German invasion of Poland? It was over the Polish corridor, Danzig. It was over a slip of land that had been argued about. Are we really going to go to war over flaming Danzig? Yes, was the answer. Having not gone to war over Czechoslovakia, having not gone to war over the Sudetenland in 1938, yes, we were going to go to war over Danzig.
Wow.
Yeah.
Remarkable. And then 5 years later, 6 years later, we see where we are. All right, let's move on to British preparation for war in light of the reporting that Deborah Haynes has done, and we've seen that Defence Select Committee report suggesting that we're nowhere near prepared. Ubergem asks, shouldn't the UK be preparing the country and people for war like Norway, Sweden and other nations?
Well, the government is talking in these terms. Not that we think that war is inevitable, but we know that we're on a road towards greater confrontation.
They would say rhetorically that they have been speaking in more forceful terms in the past 6 months than they ever have about war.
Exactly.
Right?
And that's why the Strategic Defence Review of March was conceptually so different, because it said, and it's really important to make this point, I think, because, again, I find myself being drawn into this why are we going to war question all the time. The intention of British planners and NATO planners in general is that we have to be genuinely prepared for war sometime in the next 5 to 10 years in order to deter it.
Yeah.
We want to deter this war, but the Russia we're up against immediately is one that will not agree to, as it were, a new arrangement for European security. It has somehow to be resisted. There has to come a point at which we push back forcefully. And the way to avoid war is to show that we are prepared and able to fight if necessary. And so that's this very uncomfortable road that we're on. It's not that we're rushing towards war because we want to or because we think we can't get off that road, but that by deterrence, we aim to give ourselves a position of peace through strength.
Right.
And we've said, the NATO doctrine is peace through strength. The Russian current doctrine is peace through fear. The Russians are given up on peaceful coexistence, and they push and push and push. So that's where we are. And the government is trying to prepare the public for the idea that we've got to be more resilient. We've got to entertain the possibility of mobilisation for war in order to avoid it.
We'd have to do it. So the Strategic Defence Review, which you mentioned, which came out March, was already in the works. What, previous to this government coming in, or was the government order it?
No, this is a Labour government thing. There was the big integrated review which the Boris Johnson government produced in 2021, which was delayed by COVID. And the Labour Party had always said, look, we will have a defence review. And some of us said, oh, for heaven's sake, you've had so many defence reviews, you don't need another one. We know what the problem is. But I think to its credit, they said, look, we will look at it. And they did it differently. They structured it differently. And it started with an assumption that if we don't address our problems in defence urgently, we will find ourselves dragged into a war that we will lose in the next 10 years. And so the basis of this defence review is to say between 2025 and 2035, here is a programme to make us prepared internally and externally to fight a war that we may thereby have a good chance of deterring.
Right.
We get back to peace through strength in a way that the other side knows we mean it, and they will see the strength that we are creating, so that we can, as it were, give ourselves a condition of peace. That was what the review. That's why it was so different to previous reviews.
Now, we've heard from the Defence Secretary today laying out some of the plans to make sure that our industrial base is strong enough, and there are plans in the works for there to be new factories, armaments factories. But one thing that jumped out to me that I found fascinating, Michael, I want to get your sense of it, is Article 3 of the NATO alliance. Apparently, we are nowhere near being able to actually fulfill that requirement as a NATO member. And that Article 3 is the capacity to resist armed attack. Yeah. And because of the state of our armed forces, we don't fulfill that.
Neither us nor most of the other members. That's the point. Very few of the members are. Again, you could argue that Finland is in a better position than some. The Baltic states, they're tiny, but they mobilise, or they've got mobilisation plans that are much better than ours.
Poland is in a good position to do that? Poland could do it?
Poland is moving to that, very swiftly now. But the rest of us are not. So most nations are not meeting Article 3. Because the idea of Article 3 was to say, look, NATO will be an alliance in being. And that's why it's so unique in world politics. Most alliances in international politics, going back to the Greeks, the ancient Greeks, they said, we will come to your aid if you are attacked, something like that, or we agree that we'll work together if there's a problem. But the NATO alliance is to say we will maintain forces sufficient to fight a war, because that's the way it looked in 1949, 1950, when NATO was formed. We will remain capable of fighting war on day one,
right?
And we'll all do it together. And so it was known as a come-as-you-are war.
Okay.
Right? There wouldn't be time for mobilization. It was felt that a future war would be quick. It would actually go. It would either go nuclear or not go nuclear within a matter of days, and that was a big issue. What's to stop it going nuclear, and what have we got in the way to prevent that? But it was thought to be that you win or lose this war according to what you start with.
Wow.
Now that's not as true now as it used to be,
because of the peace dividend.
Exactly. Yeah, and because we in a way we said, because the likelihood of war is less now than it has been for many years. We started to say that in 1990. Therefore, we don't need to prepare as much. So it's like saying, although my house is far less likely to burn down now than 10 years ago, I'll reduce my insurance premium, which is silly. But that's what's happened because we took the peace dividend, logically enough, but it's over. It's over. And that peace dividend, in a sense, we've got to now start paying what previous generations always paid, both materially and in human terms, in terms of our commitment. I don't mean human lives, but commitment. We've got to go back to doing what 1,000 years of previous generations have done, which is to admit the possibility that our societies might find themselves at war within our lifetime.
Obviously, the economy is completely different to what it was in the 70s, 80s, but just remind our viewers exactly how much we were spending on defence before we decided that war was not going to be happening.
Well,
sort of the
70s and 80s?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I thought you said the 1780s then.
No,
I did actually.
Not going to take you all the way back then,
I did do some work on that at
I
one
thought you
time.
might have done.
Yeah, in the 18th century. Yeah, 18th century warfare. And in fact, we were spending quite a lot. And during the Napoleonic Wars, we spent, it's a good 10, 15%
wow.
of our GDP. I was on the Navy. The Navy was so expensive. That was our principal defence. Anyway, during the Cold War, right, so now we're talking about spending 2.5% to 3%. When the Cold War came to an end in 1991, we were spending 4% then. And in the peak of the Cold War, we were spending at least 7%, by some estimates 10% in the 1950s and 60s. And of course, at the end of the Second World War, we were spending 45%.
Is that all because we had to maintain nuclear forces, the Vulcan bomber, and all that stuff that was very expensive?
Yes, it was, and we had an army of 180,000 then.
Right.
I mean, we had 60,000 troops in Germany, the British Army of the Rhine, 55,000, I think it was. And the whole British Army is now only 70.
I was going to say, it's about what we have at the moment, isn't it?
We had troops all over the world in colonial commitments, leasing and so on. And we had expensive systems. We had a big navy, big-ish navy anyway, and an air force that, we had 3 different types of V-bomber, nuclear bombers, the Vulcan, the Victor, and the Valiant. 3 completely different types of bomber to deliver nuclear weapons.
Wow.
So yeah,
that's costly.
A lot more. And it was costly, yeah. But historically, if you look back, say, for the last 120, 130 years, we were spending more like 4 or 5% on defence than 2 and 3%. That is the peace dividend. And again, the other thing to be...
Because all that investment, we didn't go to war.
We didn't go to war, no. So some say, well, that was a waste. And others say, no, it proves that it was worth spending. But we were spending about the same, at the end of the Cold War, 1991, we were spending about the same on defence as we spent on the health service.
Right.
And now we spend 5 times more on the health service non-defence. And that's not a bad thing, but it just shows the difference in our national priorities.
As I said, the economy has changed, ageing population as well, the number of people living in this country has changed.
It's a very crude statistic, but the fact is our priorities, this is the peace dividend, our priorities have changed drastically in the last 30-odd years.
Let's move on to a question here from Paul. It's one that I know you've touched on before, but it's worth reminding everyone. Paul asks, if Russia launched missiles and drones at the UK, would they be able to penetrate our defences? Would we have any means of responding in kind? It's Type 45, isn't it? The one of them somewhere.
Yeah, we're Type 45s. So we have 6 Type 45 destroyers that have a good anti-ballistic missile system on them called Sea Scepter, which takes Sea Viper missiles. And they're going to be upgraded soon. I can't remember the name of the upgrade now, but anyway, it's Sea Viper at the moment. Sorry, Sea Scepter takes Aster missiles, and it's going to be upgraded to a Sea Viper missile with a new Aster. That's what it is. So we have 6 Type 45s, of which either 2 or 3 are available at the moment because the others are in refit or they can't find crews for them. They can't man them properly or crew them properly. So we've got problems with those. Now, they do have the ability to shoot down ballistic missiles, but their ability is based on protecting either the ship itself or ships around it, like in the Red Sea, protecting merchant ships that are in their area. So though that system is good, how many can they launch at once? About 8. 8 missiles at once, and they can track, I think, double that, about 16 or maybe more, 18 missiles simultaneously.
Okay.
What's their maximum range? About 60 miles. So if somebody launched missiles at the UK, if 1 or 2 or more of our Type 45s were in the right place,
Happen to be in the right place on the eastern
then they
seaboard.
could fire some missiles, yeah. And that's it, really. That's it.
What-
But, I mean, the amount of sea space around Britain, if you look at the 12-mile limit, I mean, there's more than 100,000 square miles of sea space. So where are you going to put your 3 maximum Type 45s? They'd have to be in the right place. And even then, 60-mile range isn't going to shoot down the ones that are heading, missiles that are heading for the homeland.
People are thinking about the shipping
So the
forecast
answer is
and
no.
working out where
What we have in
Dogger
terms of
Bank.
air defence is just defence for the armed forces, to defend the things that the armed forces have got on either at sea or on land. The Army's got some air defence like Sky Streak, is it Starstreak?
So we do have
and
some
Marker.
surface-to-air missiles
They do,
dotted
yeah, but
around.
they're short range. That's the point. They're literally to defend that bit of the ground.
You probably shouldn't tell us this, but stuff around Westminster, is anything hidden? No?
No,
Okay,
I'm not joking. We've got nothing. No, nothing. We
Sorry,
do
Paul.
not have a national missile defence system, and we haven't had since the 1950s. Bloodhound was the last one we had. And I used to have an airfix model of Bloodhound when I was a boy.
I thought I knew stuff. I've never heard of that one.
Bloodhound, oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that
It was
was
an enormous thing. Enormous. Like an airfix model of it.
excellent, of course.
That was the last one.
Took you ages to build, and it wasn't the FX model that was out. It was that they had a proper one.
They had a real one, yeah.
Okay. I mean, that Paul will be slightly worried about that. I'm sure many other people will be worried about that as well. And that sort of defence of the homeland, that's not. Is that in the SDR as well?
Yes, it is.
It is. Okay.
It is, but again, the amount of it would cost to defend the homeland in any significant way is huge. So you've got to decide which bits you're going to try to defend: military bases, or 1 or 2 key cities, and literally 1 or 2 or maybe 3 key cities. I mean, this is the issue that the Ukrainians have got. They've got limited defence. They've got some Patriot systems, Patriot air defence systems, which we don't have. We've never bought any Patriots. We might in the future or something similar. And the Europeans are developing, systems that are to be the new version of Patriot. So we may do in the future, but it will be extraordinarily expensive. And you'll only ever, in a country as big as Britain, small as we are, we're still a big territory, you'll only ever be able to defend certain points. And so you've got to decide which points are really important. What we base our future on is deterrence. That in other words, if somebody launches ballistic missiles at us, then we do have the ability to strike back with something they can't defend against. So again, it's back to deterrence. Sadly, the best way to make yourself safe is to be capable of committing the sort of an equivalent amount of violence against an aggressor.
That's peace through strength, isn't it? All right, so look, Russia has continued its bombing of Ukraine overnight, hitting Lviv, a western city, which caused Poland and Romania to have to scramble jets to try and make sure that their airspace was protected. Benny 39 asks this question now after this latest threat to NATO. Is it time for NATO to say enough is enough and so show some military force? What could be NATO's red line? I mean, you kind of answered some of that. I go back to my conversation with Anders Fogh Rasmussen a little while ago, who said that regardless of what Putin says, regardless of the fear, it is time to put a NATO, a peace, a reassurance force in the west of Ukraine because why not? The North Koreans are there fighting for the Russians. Why don't we send our own forces there?
Yeah, and there's a growing body of opinion that says that if we really want Ukraine to survive, then we've probably got to get more involved, not on the front line, but we've got to actually give Ukraine some reassurance that we can defend at least, say, half of its airspace. And that would be a big moment if Europe decides to do that, or some European countries decide to do it, and the Russians will react, undoubtedly. Would they challenge it? Well, they'd try and frighten everybody, for sure. They would try and spook an air defence force. So if we had Western air power flying in, say, Western Ukraine, you can guarantee that Russian aircraft or drones would challenge them.
Test it.
Maybe not attack them as such, but see what they're made of. So that would be dangerous. But we are at a point where scrambling jets. I think we're at a point now where we've moved to, after the recent incursions, into changing the rules of engagement for aerial interception. So I think shooting down drones has now become part of the air interception protocol. Shooting down Russian aircraft, if they come back into airspace, is still a big thing, but I think we're getting closer to realistically threatening it.
Right.
And as we've talked about before, there's lots of things aircraft can do when they fly alongside a Russian aircraft that's in airspace. And one of the things I always like the idea is show them your bottom. They say the aircraft
show you bombed up.
Yeah. So you tip up and just let the Russian pilot have a look at what you're carrying. And then your mate is also, a couple of miles behind. Yeah. Because you're always intercepting twos. And the point is, if your mate locks on, then these guys are dead. And I was talking to an RF pilot who was talking about the MiG-31s that were over the Baltic a little while ago, and he said we had F-35s up there. He said it would be like a turkey shoot. If two F-35s took on 4 or 5 MiG-31s, they would just knock them out straight. He said it'd be like target practice.
Wow. I mean, question here from Johnny Boy about some of this. He used the word scrambling. Johnny Boy asks, what does scrambling jets actually mean? What's its purpose, and how much does it cost? I like these back to first principles. We use these kind of terms all the time, and perhaps we don't always know exactly what it means.
Scrambling means getting off as quickly as possible.
Right.
And in the Second World War, it was pilots running to their aircraft and jumping in and taking off. These days, it all seems a bit longer because jets leave their hangars and they taxi out, nevertheless. But they get off within a number of minutes. So let's say, as opposed to 45 seconds or so, they get off in 3 or 4 minutes. They get to height very quickly because they've got powerful engines. So they get up to 40,000, 50,000 feet, whatever it might be, and they're right beside the aircraft that they're interested in quickly. Right. And then their job is to indicate that they're there, and then we go through all the protocols as to shepherding them out of airspace, or if it looks as if that aircraft, if the hostile aircraft is in a position to do something hostile, or head toward, let's say, a capital or a military base, then that's where the pilot has to start making decisions about what to do.
And this is pilot to pilot, like flight lieutenant to flight lieutenant. It doesn't go to the ground, whatever base.
Okay. Yeah, we'll go to the ground, and on the ground you can guarantee there's a lawyer sitting next to the air controller about what's legal and what isn't. But ultimately, any pilot will tell you that you are kind of on your own there. I mean, although you will get rules of engagement, you have to report back. They're doing this, they're doing that. Give me some options. And very often they'll say, or you imagine they'll say, it's up to you now. Try this, but if they're turning away, we give you authority. If you think you've got to do it, be more forceful. Use your machine guns. I mean, they carry machine guns with tracer bullets in them. Not that machine guns are much use in modern air combat, but for this in particular, for this job in particular, I mean, firing tracer bullets either ahead of an aircraft or even peppering the tail, which will bring the aircraft down, but will give the hostile pilots a chance to eject. Give them a chance to save their lives.
The last part of Johnny Boy's question is, well, how much did it cost? I think this came up a lot when those drones were crossing into Poland and other places, that, £1,000 drone, and we were sending up F-35s, which must cost, I don't know, how much does it cost to send one up?
Well, actually, not all that much. Funnily enough, the point is you're paying for the pilot, and you're paying for the aircraft, and you're paying for all the ground support in any case, whether they fly or not. And these aircraft are up, regularly on exercises. So the only extra cost is whatever extra fuel it is. And if you release some ordnance, if you release some missiles, then the missiles cost a fair bit, depending on what they are. But it's interesting when people talk about the costs of war. It's an inconvenient fact for many people that going to war doesn't cost all that much immediately extra. It costs the extra amount of fuel and ordnance that you use. And if it's a relatively short operation, something like the Gulf War of 2003 or the Gulf War of 1991, that was all over in 100 hours, the cost was very small. Do you know Britain made a profit on the Gulf War in 1991? Go on. Because the Saudis paid for, they paid for a lot. Because they were in the lead officially with the alliance. And because it didn't cost us, the cost of the tanks, the cost of the people, that was all met anyway. That was part of just being.
You made money for that.
So we actually made a small profit on the 1991 war because we got reimbursed. So operations don't cost as much as people think they do. They just cost the extra the marginal extra cost of fuel and ordnance, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And if you go into a long war, of course, then it gets very expensive. But short operations are almost cost neutral.
I suppose the point of that question is, if drones are crossing into NATO airspace and then for some reason an F-35 does shoot them down, once you started that process, unless you've suddenly got your drone war ready, you're going to start spending a lot of money on Sidewinder missiles, whatever they fire to
exactly.
knock down
If you found yourself in a situation where you were shooting down, let's say, I don't know, 40 or 50 drones a week with 40 or 50 expensive missiles, then you would worry then about the cost exchange ratio, it's called. But in normal events, the cost doesn't really, the extra marginal cost doesn't really come into the calculation.
Okay, we're going to move on to a couple of quick fire questions, Mike, before we wrap up for this week. Question here from Lee. What are Russia's war aims? Lee's forgotten. He thinks Putin may have as well. I've got a little list of them here. I don't think this is all of them, but perhaps you can go through and we can try and make sure that we remember what Vladimir Putin
we all know that
said.
his ultimate war aim is to absorb Ukraine, and that hasn't changed from before 2014. His more immediate war aims, given that he didn't manage to take over the whole of Ukraine in 2022 in this sort of military-backed coup, which is what it was, or attempt what it was. So then his war aims seem to be the Donbass. But, of course, they've extended from the Donbass to Zaporizhia and Kherson. And it looks now as if Russian forces are trying also now to go to Dnipropetrovsk, which is
it's another oblast.
An oblast that they haven't claimed, but it now looks as if they're trying to invade that as well. So, I mean, the point is Putin's war aims seem very flexible. They move because his ultimate war aim is the conquest of Ukraine. And he's even said that. I mean, he said Ukraine is ours, and everywhere Russian soldiers go is Russian territory. Said that as well. But because he may be being brought to some sort of ceasefire next year, let's say, by events in terms of the Russian economy and maybe pressure from the United States, who knows, he will define his war aims according to what he thinks he might have to settle on next year. And if he doesn't have to settle next year and he can keep going, then he will.
Yeah, I mean, not to labour the point, but of course, built on untruths, lies. The demilitarization was one of his war aims as well. The one that always gets me is the denazification, the idea that a Jewish president needs to be denazified. It was just
and
always
all these apparent Nazis in Ukraine, the neo-Nazi party in the 2019 elections, the neo-Nazis with all of their other ultra right-wing friends got less than 2% of the vote, less than 2%. So that was the strength of neo-Nazism in Ukraine, whilst they were picking up 15 and 20% of the vote in Germany, mainly in the eastern part of Germany, the AfD and their ultra right-wing friends. So the idea that Ukraine was the hotbed of Nazism, just look at the 2019 results. That was a free and fair election, less than 2%.
Absolutely. All right. Next one. From a northern boy. Do we know what the Russian public feeling is regarding the war at the moment? He asks, surely the increased conscription is impacting national perception of Putin.
Well, increased conscription isn't quite the issue at the moment because they're doing normal conscription. So twice a year they pull in conscripts, about 130, 140,000 each time, spring and autumn. And they've not really increased that all that much. They did do a partial mobilisation of 300,000, which was very unpopular in 2022, and they've not done that since. So they're relying on contract soldiers. So either convincing conscripts to sign a contract. I mean, they give them a really rotten time when they go into the forces as a conscript and say, look, your life would be a lot better if you'd only sign a contract. And they're offering contracts to people from other countries, and they're just pulling in anyone they can. They've emptied the prisons and so on. So it's not so much a conscription issue as much as making a big effort to get soldiers on contract in various ways. But the public is changing a bit. I mean, the only really reliable opinion source we have is Levada, which is a Russian source, and it does seem to ask useful questions. And Levada, about a month ago, did a very interesting survey because the questions I really found most revealing is they said, how many Russians say that they've now got direct experience of the war? And it was 58% of Russians who answered across all regions said they either knew somebody, a friend or a family member who was involved in the war.
Pushing 2/3.
And
significant number.
Yeah, and over 70% of them said that the war is now affecting me, whereas they didn't say that before. So those sorts of percentages, I think, are quite revealing, because it does show that the Russian public, of course, they're getting fed up with this. It's going for 4 years now. It's affecting the economy. The economy is staggering. It's not going to collapse. But, I mean, fuel is now difficult, and the prices have gone through the roof. There is problems with investment. And there is a sense they want it now to be over, but they want to win.
Yeah.
It's still the case. None of them are saying, oh, well, negotiate at any price. There is still this sense that our boys are fighting, that we have a justifiable cause because the West is attacking us. That's what the majority of the public say they believe. But there's a brittleness about it. And so I'm not optimistic that the public are going to turn against this war, but I'm interested that a quite high proportion now clearly are feeling it, and that wasn't the case in 2022 or 2023. They were all insulated from it, really.
A couple of questions from me, Michael, before we come to a close today. On the sort of the news of the day, I want to talk to you first of all about the Russians and this reported peace plan that's in the works here. US site Axios reporting that the Americans through Witkoff are speaking.
Dimitrov,
speaking directly to the Russians. A 28-point peace plan. They were due to meet in Turkey. I think Zelenskyy, Witkoff was due to meet, but that's been postponed for today. There is going to be push for this 28-point peace plan. Talk to us about that, and then that'll bleed in, I think, to the next topic about the corruption in Ukraine and how that could be playing a part of it.
Well, when President Trump imposed these sanctions on Rosneft and Lukoil, it was the first meaningful sanctions, and the idea of a peace discussion in Istanbul just went off the table. Dimitrov, who's the head of the Russian Sovereign Wealth Fund, close to Putin, started to talk to Steve Witkoff in Miami, and those talks have been going on. And Witkoff has come up with this plan, which looks the same as every other plan, to be honest, but he's been talking to Dimitrov about it. And now they're briefing some of the Europeans, and they want to get Zelenskyy into it. We're back to the same old thing. But again, Witkoff looks as if he's been influenced by Dimitrov to say, look, the Russians are winning, the Russians are not unreasonable, they only want the Donbass. I don't know why he thinks that.
Well, he's actually said that for the first time we're being listened to, aren't we? The Russian opinion is being listened to. Yeah. But as you always say, you know, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, right?
That's right, exactly so. And so we're back to where we were before. The other interesting thing that's been happening is that the Pentagon are sending military personnel, some senior military personnel, to Russia. Military to military. Now again, we don't know what messages they're taking. We know those individuals. They've been to Europe. They had briefings in Germany this week. They're on a train, I think, as we speak, in Poland, to go to Moscow to talk to the Russian Defense Ministry. So you've got American military commanders, a couple of four-star generals, and the Secretary of the Army, who's a civilian, going to Moscow to speak to their counterparts. Now, it's partly this is President Trump trying to get his Ukrainian peace plan back on track, but the track they're on is still the Russian track. I mean, this is still the track of the Alaska summit, where Putin convinced him, A, that we are justified in attacking Ukraine, and B, we only want the Donbass. That's, and C, what you and I, Mr. President, are really shooting for is a new relationship between Russia and America.
And that's the point, isn't it? That they want to try
let Ukraine distract us from what the great things that our countries can do
together. The US and Russia may be able to.
So that whole thing is now back on the table. And there's one other thing I must mention about Steve Witkoff. I mean, he's a nice man, and he listens, which is why the Russians quite like him. But I mean, as a property dealer, his view is that everyone who gets around the table wants to do a deal. Because that's it. And you talk about it, and eventually you come away with a deal. You wouldn't be at the table unless you wanted to do a deal. But in politics, that's not the way it is. Like people come to the table who specifically don't want to do a deal. They're there for different reasons. He still doesn't seem to get the difference between doing an economic deal and doing a political deal.
It's this idea, isn't it? There is a deal to be done in all costs. Sometimes there isn't a deal to be done.
Sometimes one country attacks another.
Just wants to take the country over.
Sometimes nothing remains but to fight.
Yeah. Moving on to what's happening in Ukraine at the moment. And viewers will have been aware that there is the continuation of a corruption scandal that's roiling Vladimir Zelensky's administration. A senior advisor has had to flee the country under threat of arrest because of
Timur Mindich,
his involvement in this.
Great friend of Zelensky's.
Yep, his involvement in this corruption scandal. Just for those who aren't up to it, just give us a sense of what's happening here and how damaging it could be to Ukraine.
Yeah. Mindish and about 4 or 5 others, including Cherysov, who was a previous deputy prime minister, again, very close to Zelensky, have all been accused by NABU and SAP, who are the two, those are the acronyms for the 2 anti-corruption units that Ukraine runs. And there's a long investigation. There's $100 million worth of contracts, government contracts, to the nuclear energy provider, who are called Energy-Go... what's it? Energy-Go Strom, I think it is.
I can't. I'll find it. You keep talking. I'll find it here.
Energy-Go Strom.
It's the national.
Anyway, it's the nuclear generation company, and they've been taking rake-offs from government contracts at a time when Ukraine is in blackouts.
Energoatom. Energoatom.
Not Strom.
I can't read.
Yeah.
Energoatom.
Energoatom, that's right, yeah. Got it, yeah. Because it's nuclear.
Yeah.
And they've been taking rake-offs. And this has been a long process. And it comes close to Zelensky because of Mindic and because of Cherysov. It looks as if these are his personal friends, and he might have tried to shield them. And indeed, when he was trying to... he tried to end NABU.
He tried to shut them down, and there was protests.
Right, and there was protests. People said it's because it's getting close to him. My own view is that I don't think Zelensky is corrupt. I know a lot of people who say this man is not corrupt, but he's surrounded by people who are corrupt.
Right.
And that's because of Ukraine's history. It's an old Soviet republic. They were all corrupt. And 10% rake-off was regarded as absolutely normal. It still is in Russia. Anyone running an enterprise, it was generally assumed, was entitled to take 10% as their personal reward.
Just enough to wet your beak, because in all good...
So everybody...
organised crime.
Corruption.
Yeah.
Everybody. Now, and they were reportedly taking 10 to 15%. So maybe they were getting greedy. Who knows? A couple of things I'd make a point about this. One is that it's $100 million, which is trivial in compared to the rest of the budget, but it's 100 million. 2 is that they were probably taking what they thought was a rake-off and got greedy. 3, it's Ukraine's money. This is not foreign money.
Yeah.
It's not American money. And 4, the state itself, I mean, NABU and SAP, have carried through their investigations, and Zelensky either has chosen to or has got no choice but to go along with the conviction of these people.
They've got wiretap evidence, haven't they? They've got them speaking on tape.
Yeah, they've got them banged to rights, it seems. I mean, the cases have got to come to court. And as we say, that in some Mindic has fled to Israel.
Yes,
which
reportedly fled to
He
Israel.
thinks he's got something to hide. But all of this it's not good news for Zelensky, but it should not deter Western powers from saying that they still need aid. I mean, a lot of the right wing in America will say, "Oh, well, this just proves our money is going to waste." Well, it's not your money. This is the state's money going into a relatively very embarrassing, but not the worst corruption scandal, and the state itself has done something about it. And the final point, in terms of perspective, I would put is this: even if Ukraine was twice as corrupt, 3 times as corrupt, 4 times as corrupt as you think it is, even if it was as corrupt as Russia, it would still be right to support Ukraine because it's been attacked by a bigger state. I mean, the attack on Ukraine matters to the rest of us in all sorts of ways. So, Ukraine is not nearly as corrupt as Russia, but it still has corruption issues like all of the old Soviet republics have.
Absolutely. The professor's spoken. All right, final question. It says if time, and I've made time for it anyway, because I like the question, and it's one I want to get you to answer. It's from Tom, and it starts, "Dear Michael."
Oh, very good.
"We thoroughly enjoy your show, and it's a highlight of the week to listen to your insights." Tom says, "I'm currently reading your book, The Challenge of Defending Britain. Is there another book in the pipeline? Perhaps an all-round geopolitical one?" He's even giving you ideas there. Michael, is there another book in the pipeline?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, The Challenge of Defending Britain was 2019, so it's actually getting out of date now. The book I'm writing at the moment, I mean, last year I brought out this book called Great British Commanders, from Boadicea to Bomber Harris.
Very good.
But I'm now writing British Women of Command. So the women in British history who found themselves commanding either accidentally or deliberately military forces, because I just find that a very interesting topic. So I'm writing about British women of command at the moment. But I'm also starting on, is like a version of that 2019 book. I mean, Britain in Transformed Warfare. I'm not sure what it's going to be called yet. I haven't got really a working title. But because I had something to do with the Strategic Defence Review and some of the issues around that, then I think it'd be quite useful to redo that 2019 book and write a book about how does Britain figure in the transformation of warfare for the 2030s. So that's in the pipeline.
Well worth reading. I mean, most people don't have any books in the pipeline. You have two. How Professor Michael Clarke of you.
Thank you.
Right. Yes. And we'll wrap up there. Thank you for being with us. We hope to see you again next week. I think schedules align. Not going to make any promises, but most likely you will see us again this time next week, Wednesday. Thanks for being with us, and enjoy the rest of your weeks.